Today's guest is the person behind a growing website that offers high-quality studio art videos to the world at no cost. It's quickly becoming a go-to resource for art teachers and enthusiasts. I'm so pleased to speak with the art prof herself, Clara Lieu. This is Cindy Ingram, and welcome to the Art Class Curator podcast, where we're taking art out of the dark with thoughtful explorations and in-depth interviews designed to ignite curiosity and delight in art classrooms everywhere. I am so excited to welcome Clara Lieu from Art Prof to the podcast. Welcome, Clara.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get into our topic today, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and experiences, as well as how Art Prof came to be?
Sure. Well, I'm a fine artist. I largely work in drawing, printmaking, and sculpture. And in addition to my studio practice, I'm also an adjunct professor at the Rhode Island School of Design, where I've been since 2007. And I also run artprof.org, which is a free online educational website for learning visual arts.
So what made you come up with the idea for Art Prof?
It probably started in 2013 because I was writing for the Huffington Post. I was one of their bloggers. And so I started this column called Ask the Art Professor. And I thought at the time, I'll probably write 10 columns and then it'll be done. But that wasn't the case at all. I started getting tons of emails from people asking me for help on everything. Some people would say, how do I understand color theory? How do I make money selling my artwork? It was every single topic related to being a studio artist. And I realized, my gosh, there's this huge population of people who really want this information and who don't really know who to talk to about it. Because almost every message I got, somebody would say, I don't live near any other artists. It's really hard for me to take an art class. So I thought to myself, with the technology that's available today, there's got to be a way to reach these people, because I love teaching at RISD, but the thing is, the numbers of people I can reach at RISD is extremely limited. I usually teach only about 20 or 40 students a semester, and I thought with artprof.org, I could reach people over the world, basically, if I set it up correctly.
Yeah, my story is really similar. It's just, you think that the internet is this vast thing and all the information is there if you just look for it. But every time I would Google something related to teaching art, I would not find what I was looking for. I would look for examples of, artworks that would show line. I'd be like, there is nothing here, And that's what I did. I was like, well, I'm just going to make the thing that I'm constantly looking for. And I love that you saw that need and you saw that there are all these people out there that wanted that and that you created that for them. And that's amazing. And you're helping all those people. So
I don't know what your experience was, but for me, when I was looking for stuff, I'd have to go to 18 different websites. Yes. And each website would give me a little snippet. And that took forever to gather all the information. And I thought, we've got to find a way that we can streamline this information and put it in one place, so people aren't having to spend all their time searching. Because you're right, it's out there, but it's not very easy to access.
Yeah. I remember I used to be an adjunct teaching art appreciation. Yeah, my first semester teaching art appreciation adjunct, I was working full time and then I was doing this at night. And I would spend hours and hours after and on the weekends just creating all of my lessons. Because I would find, I want to teach Renaissance art, and I'd find, there's some boring lecture notes here, and then there's some images here, and then this museum website has this interesting activity here, and then finally I was like, I just have to create everything from scratch because I couldn't find what I was looking for. So I love that there are people out there that are putting all of this together in easy to digest ways that make sense, that you don't have to go searching. So that's excellent. Okay. So, but I do feel that your website is in many ways sort of opposite to mine because I focus on art appreciation and art history, and you focus pretty much, 100% on like studio media and techniques. So I think it's really interesting. And I love that there are, every art teacher has their own sort of specialty. And art is so vast that I think it's really fun how we all can have the same job, but be completely different at the same time in what we're passionate about and stuff. So I know you're really passionate about the value of the art making process and the media and learning the techniques and the skill in art. Can you talk a little bit more on that and why you find that to be as so valuable?
For me, studio art is so much about the physicality of the experience. Even if you're doing digital media, there's still the grip of the stylus. How hard do you press? How do you coordinate your eye with the stylus? And same thing with drawing. So much of it is about how do you hold your charcoal? How far away do you stand from the newsprint on the easel? And what I found is that sometimes when I'm teaching, I say to the students, just watch me draw for a couple minutes. Don't even look at the drawing I'm making. Just look at the movements and how I move throughout the page. And sometimes that physical observation is more useful than anything you could ever put into words, which is why I thought it was critical for me to move Art Prof from a written column format into videos. Because really, when you're talking about a physical action, there's only so much you can describe. It becomes hugely limited. So the videos are a way for people to really watch the process really happening right in front of you, which is really exciting and wonderful.
Yeah. And, it is because yesterday when I was preparing for this interview, I was watching some of your videos and I watched the one about balsa wood carving. I just happened to click on it and I just got sucked in because I was just watching, and I don't know that I was really listening. I was just sort of watching, and and it made me want to do it. And it made me miss that component of art because my degree is in art history and my master's in art education. I like to make art, or I never considered myself an artist, but I always enjoyed it, right? So I just felt the need to do that, but I was like, I don't have any supplies here. But I love that connection with like the physical presence of making that we have, and we've always had as people since prehistory, like the need to make things, with our hands. Right. So I love that. And it made me think of like just that joy of creating and that flow, that you just kind of get yourself in. And I was remembering my college drawing classes where you would spend 4 hours just drawing, and it just, I was learning, but I wasn't very good. My teacher said I was a very hard worker, but he still gave me a B, even though I tried really hard.
Goodness. You should have gotten an A for effort.
I think I should have, because I don't have the natural drawing talent. I don't know, that's a whole discussion we probably could have is drawing a natural talent, but I don't have that. I can't just, I can look at something and draw it pretty well. But because I didn't have that, I felt like I got punished for my grade. I'm bitter. I'm an A student.
Goodness.
You don't give Cindy Ingram a B. So anyway, that's a whole thing. Your college professors out there are like, oh God, I'm so glad I'm not her teacher. Okay, so we have the sort of physical act of creating that brings value to our lives. What else?
One of the things about teaching studio art that I think is so different than a lot of other subjects is it's really a place where people encourage experimentation and risk-taking and failing, which for a lot of my students at RISD is a really strange concept when they arrive at college, because what I've seen is that a lot of high school students, I think especially the recent generation, they've been taught to get it right, get the A, fulfill all of the requirements, check off everything on the list that you're supposed to do. And when I say to a lot of them, no, just see what happens, don't worry about it. And they look at me like, what? But I need to get this result. And what's the answer? And what is this? And I say, I don't really know exactly what this is. And that freaks them out like crazy because it's so different than what they've been told in high school. And so I think that's really important because I think all creative people understand that you can't succeed all the time. It doesn't matter who you are. And there's a lot of troubleshooting and a lot of terrible artwork that gets made before you can actually have some type of creative breakthrough. Yeah. And that's really hard for a lot of people. And I think that goes across all disciplines. I'm sure scientists have their version of it. I'm sure mathematicians and biologists in their own research, they probably grapple with similar fundamentals. And so I really love that part of the process to embrace is that we don't always know what we're doing, but there's something very exhilarating about that. I mean, I thrive on not knowing what my painting's going to look like when I'm done. I have a little bit of a gist of where I might want to go, but I'm also okay if I veer off track. And it depends. It varies from project to project. Some projects really just flow very smoothly. Other projects, you're just beating your head against the wall the whole time. And I love that. I love how different every single experience is.
Yeah, it's like an emotional roller coaster when I'm creating a work of art. I'm like, I start and I'm like, there's periods where I just absolutely love it. I'm really loving the direction. And all of a sudden I just hate it. And I hate everything about it. And then I have to kind of figure out, I got to let it talk to me, let it tell me like what can make it better, and I love that exchange. And that teaching kids to fail, I think, is so important, because you're right. Like I was one of those students that was like in the AP program, and I had all these college credits, and I got to college and I just floundered because I didn't know how to fail. I didn't know how to be vulnerable. Right. And I think that art can teach us that. And even like talking about a work of art, like you can build that in, there doesn't always have to be an answer. So I love that we give them that opportunity. Those are awesome points. So tell us about the type of art that you like to make.
I'm a strange artist in that I do not define myself by the media that I work in. For example, I have colleagues who are exclusively painters, or they're exclusively printmakers. And I'm unusual in that I have expertise in a whole range of areas, drawing, painting, printmaking, and sculpture. But I don't tend to stay in one of those areas for very long. What I generally do is I think about the project I want to make, and then I look at my skills and I say, okay, which material is best suited to the project I want to make? And not only that, half the time I have to teach myself a technique in order to do something. A couple of years ago, I was playing around with these portrait drawings I was doing, and I really wanted to try out doing mezzotint printing, which I'd never done before. And so I had to teach myself how to rock the plate, how to scrape the plate, how to print the plate, because even though I am experienced in intaglio printmaking, I had never really done a mezzotint before. And so I thrive on that, really teaching myself new techniques, or even using a technique that I'm familiar with in a totally different way. For example, I did a lot of drawings a few years ago using lithographic crayon, and in the beginning I was just using it additively. And then after a while I realized I could scrape away at it, and then I started adding on top of the scraping. And so that was really fun because I felt like there was this wonderful learning curve with me and the crayon that we really started to understand each other after a little while. And that was so much fun. In terms of subject matter, my favorite subject of all time has to be the human face, because the human face to me, it doesn't get deeper than that, right? I mean, it's who we are. And I just think the human face, it's so incredibly expressive. It says so many different things depending on how you pair it. I have done a lot of figurative pieces as well, but I think for me, when it comes down to it, it really is the human face.
Oh, yeah. I love that. So what you were saying about the media, I think is really interesting and great. I think, we should expose our students to as many different art media as possible, so that when they do have the idea or if they have some sort of meaning or message they want to put into the world through their art, that they can find the right media to fit kind of what they're doing. Because not all ideas, there's probably one right medium for your idea that you have, so that you need to experiment with all of those. And it's so fun to I want to learn to mezzotint.
I don't know. When you find out how long it takes to rock the plate, you might change your mind.
Oh, maybe not. I'm not very patient. I am patient, but maybe not for that. I don't know. I do like printmaking, though. That was always one of my favorites. So awesome. Okay. So this past summer, I went to a conference, and it was with my old job, which was a classical school. Mm-hmm. And they take all the teachers to a conference in the summer at this sort of classical themed university. And all the art teachers were kind of together and doing different sessions. And the teacher of the session is a professor at that university, and it's Hillsdale College. I cannot remember his name right now, but we talked a lot, and he really focuses a lot about realism, or his art and his teaching really focus on realism and technique for realism and stuff like that. And when he talked a lot about how the technique and the skill of creating realistic art and that sort of stuff is sort of leaving a lot of our college educations because we're focusing so much on personal expression and the idea and the emotional connection to art. So I'm wondering what you think about that sort of duality, and do you have any thoughts on that?
If I step back and I look at the different generations of artists throughout art school, I think it goes back and forth. For example, a lot of the professors that I had as a student in art school, they were educated in the 70s. And so they were really taught by abstract expressionists. Yeah. And then a lot of those teachers became figurative painters. And so they're teaching a generation of mine figurative art, but then my generation might be teaching something else. So I see this almost flip-flopping between all of these different ideas. And so, yeah, I think that certain things do become trendy or less trendy, but I think that there's always a resurgence. I mean, if you think about Eric Fischl, who is a figurative artist, his work really resurrected the idea of the human figure in the 1980s. Now, in the 70s, with abstract expressionism, I mean, painting the figure was the kiss of death. You just did not do that. Eric Fischl brought it back. And there's also artists like John Kern and Julie Heffernan, who I think have also resurrected the figure lately. So I think right now it's probably not quite as clear cut as it was in the 70s. I think that there is this resurgence of figurative artists coming back. But yeah, it just things go in and out. And so I think the second we start embracing digital media too much, someone's going to come in and say, hey, we need to start doing more manual processes. And then some people will say, hey, we just came up with this great new media. We have to try this out. And so I think that everything's a reaction. I think probably as somebody who's an art historian, you know that different movements in art happened because of what was happening at the time. People react to the context. And so sometimes I see people, it's almost like they try to recreate the Renaissance today. And I just say, you can't do that because the world was different during the Renaissance. Things that remain in the Renaissance don't have the same weight or pull the way they did back in the Renaissance today. So I guess I always, whenever I do look at art history, I'm not an art historian, but I do talk about artists in class, is I always try to contextualize the artist. I say, look, this was happening during the time. And so therefore Caravaggio was this crazy rebel compared to everybody else. I think that's really important for students to understand.
Yeah, because even I always use Baroque's reaction sort of against Renaissance as my main example too. But it's also, you think about the resurgence of the Renaissance with neoclassical, and they did do a lot of the Renaissance stuff, but they added their own flair to it, the patriotism and the nationalism, you know, like all the revolutions and stuff that were going on. So it's like the context will influence it. So you just can't stop and think, okay, what would happen if I just recreate the Renaissance today and then just make it happen and then the Renaissance happens? Like these things just sort of flow naturally. And it's interesting to think about, like, we're living in art history now, like what in 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, if we keep the earth alive for that long, then like, what are they going to be saying about what was happening now? I love to think about that. So I didn't think about that. It's even the ebb and flow of just every 10 years, like what's happening and who's teaching who. That's interesting.
Well, I think in academia, it becomes very clear because most of the professors that I had, they're all about 70 or 80 right now. And so I'm about 40. And so it's almost like certain generations almost get shut out of teaching in academia because there's this huge flow of hiring because a whole bunch of people are going to retire really soon. And then they bring in all these replacements and then nobody has to hire for another 15, 20 years. Yeah, the people who I think are about mid-50s right now, that generation almost got shut out of academia. And when I think about my colleagues, not a lot of them are in that age range. Most of them are either my age or in their 70s or 80s. It's very interesting. I mean, that's a huge generalization. I'm not saying that's the case everywhere, but I'm just saying I've noticed that there do seem to be these waves of people who get hired in academia.
That's really interesting. Because my whole thing is changing the way that they teach art history because, you know, that art history is so boring. I'm like, it's going to take a while then if we're, okay. I'm going to think about that later too, but I don't want to sit here and like, what have you listen to me think. I'll let you. Okay. So what kind of artwork do you like to look at? So when you go to the museum, what are you most drawn to?
That's a great question, because I find that a lot of students make the assumption that because I do a lot of portraits, that I work in drawing and printmaking in a fairly representational way, they assume that, oh, well, you must really like Lucian Freud and you must really like Jenny Saville. And so they come up with all these portrait painters, Kathy Kollowitz and stuff, who I actually do happen to love to death. But I think they make an assumption that I'm going to like work that's like mine. And that's not true at all. In fact, a lot of the artwork that I love looking at is nothing like mine, because to me, it's almost like artwork that is so foreign to my own studio practice. It's like I can't wrap my head around why somebody would make something like that. Because to me, I understand why people paint the figure. I know why people love portraits, because I do myself. And so when somebody paints a portrait, I'm not like mystified. Why would you want to paint a face? I totally get it. But when I look at somebody like El Anatsui, who's creating those gigantic pieces from recycled cans and things like that, and it's meticulously woven together, I just can't conceive of how he came up with that, the process of making it. And I just am fascinated by artwork that is nothing like mine.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I was wondering what your answer would be, and I wouldn't have predicted really that answer.
Right. I definitely have my top favorites in terms of figurative artists. I mean, Kathy Kollowitz is up there. I'd say Giacometti is up there as well. And I do really like Lucian Freud, but I guess I'm just more engaged by pieces that just feel more foreign to me.
So yesterday I was coming up with this whole theory, and I'm just going to throw these random theories at you. But I was having a conversation with one of my friends who works for my website too. And so she doesn't have an art background, but she's been learning art through me. And I showed her Echo of a Scream by David Alfaro Siqueiros. And it's like this baby, and then that's kind of a scream, big baby behind it. And it's just in this desolate world, and it's just very emotional. And she said, I'm scarred for life because you showed me that artwork. Thank you very much. I will never get that out of my head. And I was like, well, that artist succeeded because they made you feel something when you looked at it. And then she was like, oh, you're an emotionalist, because I also had recently done a video on art theories. And I was like, I am an emotionalist. So, and then I was like thinking about, because this was just yesterday, and I was thinking about our interview today, and I'm like, well, I think Clara Lieu might be a formalist. And so then I was going through everybody I know, and then I was thinking, okay, this person, assigning all the art teachers that I know, one of the art theories, the emotionalism, formalism, instrumentalism, and the other one, imitationalism. Yes. So I don't know where I'm going with this. In my head on the car ride home, I was being very smart, but I was wondering like how that informs our teaching, because each art teacher comes at art in this sort of different way. So I come at art from this emotional place. Like when I go to a museum, I'm looking for the ones that are going to make me moved in some way, that are going to make me cry, that are going to make my heart jump out of my chest, that are going to set. Like those are the things that I'm drawn to, right? So, and then that informs my teaching, because those are the artworks that I choose to write about on my website. Those are the artworks that I choose to show in my classroom, because those are the ones that draw me in. Like what you think about this? Like how do you think your art theory, do you have an art theory that you think that you kind of come at? And how does that impact your teaching?
I don't know that I have an art theory point of view. I mean, it's probably more because I don't know as much about art history as I should. But I mean, when I go to a museum and I'm looking at pieces, I search for pieces that make me feel something, whether it's funny or serious or horrific. I went to a museum in Taiwan, and there was this wonderful sculpture of this female figure, and she had the funniest face I had seen in so long. I mean, I literally laughed out loud when I saw this sculpture. And who would think that a stone sculpture would make you feel that way? It doesn't seem like that would be the case. And I also found it hysterical that the national treasure of that museum is a little piece of cabbage that is cut from jade. And I thought that is so perfect for Taiwan to have their national icon be a piece of cabbage. Because if I know anything about Taiwanese people, is that we love to eat. And that is our life. And then next to the cabbage, there is a piece of stone, but it was cut so that it looks like a piece of pork. I mean, it really looks like pork, like you would never think it was actually stone. And I found that hysterical too, because who looks at a stone and says, oh, that's a piece of pork. I think I'm going to put it into the museum. That's fabulous. But then I'm also somebody who will go to the Met and I'll see the Burghers of Calais by Rodin and feel agonizing pain and emotional anguish. So I want to feel that I'm reacting to something. I'm not very intellectual in that I don't tend to like political artwork as much, or artwork where I have to like understand some theory to get it. I'm very much about that gut reaction, I suppose.
Yeah, well, and that makes sense too with how you talk about creating art, because the way you talk about it is the feeling.
Yeah.
So how do you teach your students how to marry the media and technique of creating art with the creating that sort of reaction in the viewer? Do you talk about the viewer when you teach about the art and how they might be responding to it?
Absolutely. Because actually, I would say that's probably the component of making art that my students think about the least.
Yeah.
Because I think when you're an artist, everybody does this, myself as well, you get very stuck in your own head. And you have this idea that you want to do, and you're so set on it that you forget that somebody who is not you might not get it, or they may read it incorrectly. And so whenever we critique artwork, I let them know, are you aware that a lot of people would not read it that way, that they would see it like this, and here are the reasons why. And so a big part of critique is just them getting to see really objectively what the work is, because you just can't most of the time. I was saying to a student yesterday at RISD, they said, why did I pick my worst thumbnail sketch? And I said, everybody does that. Most people will make a bunch of thumbnail sketches and they'll pick the worst one. And then they have to come into critique. And then we talk about, well, this one might be better for these reasons and everything. But I think we all make that mistake where we just forget about what everybody else thinks. It's just...
Yeah, I love, bringing in the other voices in a critique. And if you have not listened to the podcast episode on the Art of Education's podcast, Clara did a interview there. So if you want to know more about her critique techniques, you can listen to that episode, which we'll link to in the show notes. I don't want to get into the same content from that interview, but it was a good one and I read the transcript of it. So yeah, I love that you're thinking about that with your students and you're talking about that, because I think it's just a fine balance, because you want the art to be so personal, but you also need to think about who's doing it. And then you also need to think about like making it look pleasing, and like making it look like something, and so you teaching, it's so multi-layered, the teaching the technique in the media, teaching the composition, teaching the meaning and how to create a meaning and put it out there. So I think it's great that we have all these different voices, and on every artist has different teachers teaching them so that they can get all of that.
Yeah, I was telling my class yesterday that it's almost like you have to think about your drawing as a giant package with all of these pieces and parts. So did you sketch your thumbnails? Did you think about lighting? Did you think about color? Did you consider composition? What about the subject matter? How do you develop this idea? And I think for a lot of students, they only think about 2 out of those 15 things, usually at a time. And I say, look, you can't drop the ball on color and think that the composition is going to bail you out, because both of these are just as important. And that's what makes making an artwork so complex, because there are so many facets to making it.
Yeah. And I love, from the teaching the art appreciation side of it, I love to talk with students about, well, what was the choice that the artist made to make you feel a certain way? So if you're getting this story, what did the artist do to create that story? And so it gets them thinking about all of the different things that the artist has to think of. Because if you start crying in front of a work of art, the artist did something. What was it that the artist did that made that happen?
Right.
If an artwork makes you laugh, like have you seen the work of Nina Kachadorian? I
don't think so. I know her name, but I haven't seen her work.
If you like funny artwork, you need to go research her immediately. There was an exhibit in, where was it? San Francisco or in Stanford. And I laughed the entire episode exhibit. I was thinking about podcasts and the entire episode. But anyway, I don't know where I was going with that, because every time I start thinking about her, I'm like, I just want to keep thinking about her. It's so funny. Okay. I'll link to her work in the show notes too, so people can.
Oh, good.
Okay. So I'm in 6,000 online Facebook groups for art teachers. I'm in art teachers. I'm in middle school art teachers. I mean, all of the art teacher groups.
Oh, wow. You're worse than I am.
I am in a lot of them. And I'm in the groups too. I'm in a lot of groups. But I see a lot of back and forth in these online communities about art teachers who are not trained artists. So someone will get online in the Facebook group and they'll ask a question about ceramics that they don't know. And then there will be a bunch of people who are helping that person. But then there's also a bunch of people who are like, how do you not know this? You went to college to be an art teacher. Why don't you know how to fire a kiln? And I'm like, I don't know how to fire a kiln. I've had artwork fired for me, but I've never done it. I've never owned one, never had one in my classroom. So I see this sort of back and forth a lot that, there are artists so vast and all art teachers don't feel like they have the studio skills to do certain things effectively in the classroom. So do you have any advice for art teachers who feel that they might be lacking in those studio skills and what they can do to help themselves and also help their students?
I think it really depends on what technique it is, because there are certain techniques where if you mess it up, it's no big deal. But for example, firing a kiln, that is not something you want to mess with unless you really know what you're doing. And so something like that where there is a potential safety hazard, I would definitely find somebody in person who can walk you through that, somebody who's really experienced. Because I think that there are other techniques where sometimes just a little bit of online research would be fine. But this is what I usually do. If I want to know how to do something, I just find the person who does it and I talk to them and I get advice. For me, that's very easy because I teach at RISD and I just go, oh, who's on campus that teaches 3D printing? Let me go talk to them. And they're usually around the corner, so that's not so difficult. But I find that when I'm learning a new technique, it's a mishmash of stuff. Usually the beginning is just getting on Google and saying, okay, well, what's involved with a mezzotint? In the case of mezzotints, there's a quintessential mezzotint book. It's been written by Carol Wax, and she's the quintessential mezzotint printmaker. She is the absolute authority in that area. And so sometimes it's very clear cut, and I read her book and I did lots of research on contemporary mezzotints and everything. So I think just to number one, not have any ego about asking for help. I try to tell my students that because a lot of them don't ask for help. Like, for example, in critique the other day, I said to the student, why didn't you ask me about this? And they said, I don't know. I'm like, just ask. Send me an email. It's a 2-minute email to ask me that question, and then you know what's going on. Because I have seen this, that in some professional settings, people are afraid to ask for help because they're worried about that, which is why it bums me out when people sort of give other people trouble for, why don't you know? Well, there's a lot of things I don't know. I don't know how to cast bronze. I don't know how to weld. I mean, those are all things that I didn't take in art school. And I'm embarrassed that I never took a formal photography class, even though I use so much photography in what I do today. So I think that as long as you're being responsible about it in terms of hazards and doing your research, I mean, I think that everybody goes to a different program. People are educated at different schools. I don't think you can pass judgment on somebody just because they don't know how to weld or do whatever technique.
Yeah. And I think this kind of relates back to what we were talking about at the beginning about teaching students that it's okay to fail. Because I think a lot of teachers feel like they're supposed to be the expert. They're not supposed to be the one failing. So I think setting an example for the students, and you can go, this is something new to me. I'm learning how to do it. Tried it first. That's another thing they do online is they'll start doing a project and the teacher hasn't actually tried it before they brought it to the kids. But yeah, I think that we can set an example of how to ask for help, how to learn a new skill. So you can even teach the students like, hey, I think I would really love to talk about this printmaking technique with you guys. I've never done it. So I really want to learn this together with you. And that teaches them that it's okay that even, when you're old, according to a teenager, when you're old, no matter what age you are, it's okay to still be learning and you're always going to be learning. So I think teachers should just be vulnerable in that way.
Right. Sometimes I will even say to the students when I'm giving a new assignment, I'll say, guess what, guys? You get to be my guinea pigs. And they find it funny. They think it's cool that I'm trying something new and let's see how it goes. And trust me, it doesn't always go well.
No.
There's been assignments where I'm thinking, oh, what was I thinking?
Alex, guys, you paid attention for this.
Yeah, they need to see that though. They need to, I mean, I would never do that with every assignment. Usually if I'm teaching a course and it's 12 weeks, I'll maybe put in one new assignment that I've never done before. I always have my classics, my staple assignments, but usually there's at least one wild card in there per semester.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. So you're really good. I can tell you do videos because you can restart your sentences so well.
Oh, I've done this so much. This is from years of doing it really badly. Trust me.
Yeah, like because your videos are so polished, but I'm like, yeah, you can stop and then you can just start it over as if like you said it first time. I love that.
Only took 3 years.
Right. Okay. As we wrap things up, I want to give you the opportunity to tell the teachers a little bit more about Art Prof and what specifically they can use in their classrooms that might enhance the learning for them and their students.
I see Art Prof for art teachers as being a supplement. We're in no way trying to replace the classroom because I am such a brick and mortar teacher. I've always been in the classroom my whole life, and there's so many advantages to that type of interaction, which of course you just don't get online. So I think it's a great place to go if you have a student who maybe is exceptional and just wants an extra challenge. I think we also have a lot of lesson plans on there. So you could, for example, look at the video that's based on balsa wood, and you could do that project with your class. We try to provide all the logistics so that you know, here's the supply list, here are some of the safety hazards, and make sure that this is done in the classroom. So we try to address it as if we were talking to an individual artist or if we were talking to an art teacher, which is logistically challenging for us, but I think helpful for art teachers. I also think the critique section, I've had a lot of teachers tell me they found that very useful because sometimes when a student is being critiqued, it's really difficult for them to look at the critique process objectively, whereas if they watch somebody else's critique, they can be really objective because it's not them. So a lot of teachers have told me that they've showed the critiques in class just to show this is what a critique is, this is how you do it, this is the guidelines and everything. But yeah, I mean, I would hope that teachers really use it as a place to enrich what they're already doing and to give students maybe some independent projects where they don't have to be so involved in the hands-on and everything. We also have lots of live streams on Instagram Live where you really can be there with the artist and ask them questions live. And I've done that with a couple of classrooms as well, people who have won our monthly art challenges. We call them art dares at Art Prof, but those are also fun because that's a monthly art challenge and we give you a prompt. People post on Instagram, they use hashtag ArtProfDare, and that's another fun way because you get to win prizes. We have this huge art pack of Tombow colored pencils and jelly plates and all this fun stuff. So we're hoping that that's another supplement to what teachers do.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the art dares if you didn't, because I think that's an excellent supplement to the classroom because it can be, you know, some schools will require you to assign homework and I don't like to assign homework, but some do. And so it could be that, you know, the art dare on Art Prof that month is your homework assignment. And then and kids love the Instagram, you know, or I don't know, I think there might be going away from the Instagram, I hear, but you know, they can even post their artwork on there and that be part of the assignment. I don't know, you probably can't require that. But anyway, I love the art dares. And they're really quick. They're not very complicated. And you can see an artist. There's a video of the artist talking about it. I think it's a really fun idea. And I love a community that it creates too. So.
Yeah. And it's fun because you get to see other people doing the dare because we post people's submissions. And that's also fun to say, wow, how did this person interpret this? Last month, we did an art dare about junk mail. So we said, make any artwork using junk mail. Some people did a 3D piece. Some people did something that was a collage. And it was so fun to say, oh my gosh, look at how different all of these are, even though everybody started in the same place.
Yeah, you all started the same idea and so many different interpretations. It's just super fun. And there's so many studio creation videos on there that you could use to supplement, if you're doing a drawing lesson, pull up some of the drawing videos and show those to the kids, just because it just adds more models and examples, and seeing artists move and all of that is so useful. So if you have not checked out artprof.org, I recommend you do it because it's excellent. So do you have a favorite social media? You mentioned your Instagram tag, artprof.
It's at art.prof.
Okay. So do you have any other favorite social media you want to point us to?
No, I think that's it.
The blog, or not the blog, but the website and the Instagram. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And I found it very interesting, and I hope everyone else did too. I think it's just fascinating to talk about the things we're passionate about. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Cindy. This was so much fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and give us an honest rating on iTunes. This will help other teachers find us and hear these amazing stories. Do you want even more art inspiration? Sign up for Art Class Curator's once a week email newsletter, Your Weekly Art Break. Teacher Sarah Warnock says, I truly do take a break from my busy week to check all your links and feel inspired. Everything you share is relevant, meaningful, and also super helpful. You definitely help me become a better art teacher, and I look forward to your emails each week. You can sign up at artclasscurator.com/artbreak. And as a free gift for subscribing, you'll get 6 free art interpretation worksheets to use in your classroom. Be sure to tune in next week for more inspiring art interviews. Thanks again to Clara for the awesome conversation today. It's exciting to think about all of the artists Art Prof is creating and nurturing, and I can't wait to see how the community continues to grow. Be sure to check out the show notes at artclasscurator.com/21 to learn more about Clara's work and everything we talked about today. It's October, so next week on the podcast, we're getting a little spooky with high school art teacher Chris Screws. You'll love the creative way he brought what he learned running a Halloween haunted house into his classroom. Keep listening to hear a preview of my interview with Chris.
Now, we set a theme every year. So this past year was they had to take classic monsters, so a vampire, a werewolf, a mummy, and then they had to do their spin on that. So they started pairing up, or in some cases we had as many as 4 people in a group. They started developing storylines for their possible character. They had to present those. In fact, I told them that I did not want 2 of anything. I didn't want 2 vampires or 2 werewolves. So they had to write up their proposals, and they had to make a presentation in front of the entire class. So I had executive decision on which character was going to go, but they also, by them seeing each other's work, they would realize, okay, yeah, your vampire is way more interesting than mine. So I'm going to back off that, and I'm going to let you take that, and I'll go somewhere else.